Wonderful. I love how, there's a hubbub of activity and all of a sudden it just drops. Wonderful. Thank you everyone for taking your seats. Again, my name is Nicholas Moyer. I'm Executive Director of the Humanitarian Coalition. And it's a very privileged role that I have. I have the wonderful opportunity of being able to work very closely with and on behalf of some of Canada's most respected and capable humanitarian agencies. And members of the Humanitarian Coalition are, as you know, but their logos are quite small up here, CARE Canada, Save the Children Canada, Oxfam Canada, Oxfam Quebec, and Plan Canada. And I'm joined here today by Rosemary McCartney, who is CEO of Plan Canada and also Chair of the Humanitarian Coalition Board, and as well by Paul Forbes, who's here representing the Conference Board of Canada today. And I want to talk to you very briefly, and they're joining me to talk to you about private sector collaboration. And the Humanitarian Coalition was actually formed, among other things, with this belief that by working together, our agencies could actually foster greater collaboration with the private sector. A belief that by working together, we could provide a collective opportunity to partner in a way that was more accessible to actors on the private sector. It's a fairly lofty objective, the idea that we could overcome competition among us to provide a real opportunity for engagement, particularly with the media. And this is actually where we've had some of our greatest successes. We've been able, through our model, to partner with organizations like Bell Media, Metro News, Shaw Media, and others, the Globe and Mail, to support us when there are large disasters. By avoiding the cacophony of multiple voices asking for support, we've been able to find a solution that works. And we hope we can continue to grow that in the future. One of the things that we've really encountered is that when disasters happen is actually when the private sector calls us. But we as humanitarians at that moment in time have a lot of trouble engaging in those conversations. We're preoccupied, as we should be, with the needs on the ground. We're preoccupied with buying locally, with making sure that our delivery of programs is as efficient as possible. And it's very difficult for us to engage at those moments. Many humanitarians in the room here would be able to sympathize with the experience of having to deal with a really generous offer by a private sector corporation that is trying to offer you anything from a container full of shoes to heavy lift equipment for Haiti, but not being able to actually take advantage of that opportunity as it's offered. Inversely, what we have with the private sector, and so, sorry, I shouldn't say that. What we have is that humanitarians are interested in these conversations outside of disasters. We are ready and able to have some of those conversations. And I think many of us are aware, and we've heard it today, as we've also heard it from the Minister yesterday, we heard it from Valerie Amos a little earlier, that we do need to be exploring what the potential is on this front. Without exploring it, where will we, how can we find better ways of doing things? And so we're confronted with this reality that there is a lot of potential. And in fact, there's a lot of great international research done by the Humanitarian Futures Program, done by ODI, published earlier this year on private sector collaboration for disaster response. But what does that mean for us here in Canada? And that's what we're here to talk to you about this morning, is that, and the Minister yesterday beat us to the punch and announced this new project that we're launching. And while the Humanitarian Coalition is a group of 5 NGOs, we very much are launching this project on behalf of the sector and look to be engaging with you to contribute in this project. What we're doing is we're launching a research and consultation project looking at the barriers to collaboration for disaster response and the opportunities for collaboration for disaster response. We're not quite sure where this will take us yet. I think we need to really try to understand that, and what I'm saying from a Canadian perspective. So if we look at responding to disasters internationally, what could that mean for us here in Canada? And there are some great experiences that we're going to be hearing about later today, and there's some great innovation and partnerships that you represent within this room, and we look forward to hearing about those. We're going to be working closely with the Conference Board on that research, and we look forward to being able to present that research and initiate the conversation with the sector in the months ahead. We're hoping to have a report ready to share in May. And that's as much of an introduction that I want to give. I'm going to ask Rosemary to speak to, and Paul to speak to why they think this is an important project. And I think as I hand over, that I really want you to know that we are going to be turning to you for your input. This is not just about one organization. It's about trying to find a space for this conversation about the potential and trying to incubate some of the partnerships that we know could explore the potential for our collective capacity. So, Rosemary, I hand over to you.
Sure, thanks, Nick. I'm really pleased that this research is about to be launched, because my view is I don't think we can do good policy work. We can't advocate for new investment decisions unless it's based on an empirical foundation. And the research team that is in this room, I think, are highly appreciative of that. We need good research to inform good advocacy and good policy for ODA. So, for some time, there's been this mantra, and we've all heard it in meetings with DFAT-D and when the Prime Minister speaks, or and all of the cabinet, about private-public partnerships. It's like a mantra. And my concern is that I'm not sure we all have a shared view of what that even means. In cartoons, that little bubble that goes above the cartoon character, I think we all have little things in those bubbles, like, what's their motivation? Can I trust them? Is this a procurement opportunity? Oh, is this a donation opportunity for that project I can't get funded? I think everyone's carrying around words in those brain bubbles. So I'm not sure we have a common view of what we're talking about when we talk about private-public partnerships. And I think there's a range of things. So I'm pretty pragmatic. I know as an NGO, I know what we're good at. We're good at child protection, we're good at emergency response, health, education, etc. But when I meet with that amazing bulge of young people around the world in 60, 70 countries, the thing that they're asking is, I need a job. How do I get a job? And yesterday, I think it was Nigel Fisher said, even in the worst of crises, the three things are, I need a job, I want my kids back in school, and I want my physical security, but I need a job. I need a job actually to get some of those things done. And I don't think civil society, we're not job creators. I mean, we have an amazing percentage of jobs in Canada, but we're not job creators in overseas countries. So, that's not our value proposition. So I think we need to kind of sort some of those things. And I think one of the reasons I think the project is going to be important, and it's going to report out very early. We're not going to take a year to do this. It'll be late spring. And then we want to convene some people to look at the research. But, when you think about what do we mean by the engagement of the private sector with civil society? Because it's a spectrum, isn't it? I mean, there's donations, a kind of a transactional moment, right to joint ventures and partnerships that are relational and long-term. So there's an entire spectrum. And when we talk about private-public partnerships or relationships or engagement, and even those words get mixed up. So, someone mentioned this morning about co-branding and the risk that entails, just even co-branding on Christmas cards. And it was Denise sitting at the table from Oxfam, Quebec. And so, there's that spectrum, and there's a whole lot of middle in the middle, muddling in the middle, I would say. We, for example, Plan Canada, we have hand takes on adolescent clothing with Sears Canada, and they donate to our Because I Am a Girl fund. Well, that's a co-branding exercise that, we had to do risk assessments with, we had to do an ethical scan of the company, all of those things. But to me, that's kind of in the middle between that transaction and that longer-term relationship that you might have. So there's that. And then to me, there's a spectrum that I think we have to be cognizant of in Canada, and that is the spectrum of the Canadian private sector. And so, Paulo, you push back on me, but most of the Canadian private sector is pretty small. So you think about the spectrum of the Canadian private sector, lots of small, very domestic-oriented entities, a few large in the middle, and a couple that we could say are truly multinational, right? And so you look at that spectrum, who are we engaging with? And because that'll change entirely the nature of the partnership or the nature of engagement. But if you look at our sector, civil society in Canada, it's the same. A whole lot of entities that are small, a few that are very large, and not enough that are in the middle heading to a different place, that are strong and getting stronger, a lot that are quite weak. And it's the same, we mirror the private sector in that. And then I would say, and I think it's self-evident, there's a spectrum of performance, right? Low performers in the private sector and high performers in the private sector, and then a bunch in the middle that you want to move up to high performance. But it's no different than our sector. We've got low performers, we've got high performers, and we've got a lot in the middle that are getting better and better and stronger. We're no different from that kind of spectrum. And so, you know, there's parts of the private sector you don't want to touch, and there's parts that you'd be very happy to work with. And that shouldn't surprise us. I think we would say the same if we were very honest and self-reflective about our own sector. There's NGOs that you want to work with, and there's some you don't want to work with. And then finally, I would just say, like, and I'm narrowing it because I'm just thinking like of a triangle here. So you've got this big base called the private sector. You've got this middling group, and it's getting narrower. But then, how many in the Canadian private sector actually want to work overseas, who have the capacity to do it well, to be successful, who actually have the ambition? I talk to so many business people in our country, and our trade commissioners kind of tear their hair out. Like, how many actually want to go into those complex markets with the higher risk portfolio, potentially higher return as well. But by the time you get through all of those scans, you're talking about a pretty small group of Canadian private companies that we would work with, or that want to work with us, or that actually makes sense, especially when you get to the value proposition. So we're not talking about everything on that spectrum. And so when you boil it down, you've kind of got a couple of banks, you've got a whole bunch of resource companies, and you've got some small, hot tech sector companies, social media companies. So we want to sort all of that and kind of sift it through. And then finally, what I would say is that with all this talk of private-public sector, I'm not even sure what private sector we're talking about. Is it the Canadian private sector? Or is it actually the emerging market, developing countries' private sectors that are growing and burgeoning, et cetera, who actually would look to us as very adept partners, where, again, there's a real value proposition on what we can bring with our expertise, what they can bring, et cetera. And I don't think that's been unpacked yet either. When you ask that question, is it just the Canadian private sector? Or is it the people that MEDA is working with and others are working with in the emerging markets to build capacity in those sectors? So, you know, I think that the research project is well timed. I think there's a lot of things we want to unpack. You know, I was speaking at something last week, and someone asked me about this private-public sector partnership, and I said, you know, when you boil it all down, what NGOs have and must absolutely protect is reputation. That's all we've got. That's our capital, is our reputation and the trust that we build with our supporters in Canada and with the beneficiaries, the so-called beneficiaries that we work with, our partners overseas. And so I think it's like dating or marriage. You have to choose your partner really well when it's all boiled down. So I'm looking forward to seeing the research, Paul.
Thank you. Paul.
So I thought perhaps I'd cover 3 topics in my opening remarks, maybe give you a sense of who we are. Also perhaps explain how our paths cross with Nicholas and myself. And then really what came out of it. So maybe getting into a little more details about the project that we're going to be doing. So who we are? Well, the Conference Board of Canada is actually an independent non-for-profit organization. We provide highly relevant and balanced analysis of key issues facing Canada and Canadian organizations. We really engage with more than 700 organizations, but these include, you know, not only corporations, but we engage with government departments and agencies, labor unions, industry trade associations, universities, hospitals, and even public libraries. So we've got a fairly broad sector. But for more than 60 years, the Conference Board has been a trusted source of information and insight for leaders in organizations across the country. Now, the Conference Board of Canada also conducts research in corporate community investment, in governance, human resources, economics, management practices, and public policy. Well, we provide organizations across sectors and industries with independent analysis on emerging policy and management issues, and opportunities for dialogue with Canadian management, with the Canadian management community. So our mission essentially is to really help clients anticipate and respond to the changing world in the workplace, business, and governance. Now, we do this through the development of exchange of knowledge about organizational strategies and practices, emerging economic and social trends, and key public policy issues. We've been committed to researching innovative practices, designing new strategies, and providing our clients with the most up-to-date information, analysis, and expertise to really help them excel not only in Canada but around the world. So now about how our paths crossed between with Nick and I. So it was actually in July, and it was a member of one of the Corporate Community Investment Council, a council that I look after at the conference board, and she's actually one of our members, but she's with a foreign-owned multinational company operating in Canada. And she had actually heard Nicholas talk at a forum and contacted me and said, I think there's something there, and I think she saw, a win-win opportunity for collaboration. And it was a collaboration between the Community Investment Council, this group, and for me, that was the first the indication of when you get into a win-win opportunity for collaboration. I think that's the key to a sustainable, what can become a partnership, a sustainable partnership. So on October 28th, I invited Nicholas to come to one of our Community Investment Council meeting, and our meeting was in Toronto. And at this session, we looked at he introduced us to the large international disasters and how, and we started looking at how Canada's private and nonprofit actors sort of maximize their respective contributions to save more lives. That was sort of like the whole premise. So we discussed how to break down barriers and promote cross-sector collaboration, and to try and scale up some effective participation of the private sector, and to sort of work on our individual expertise and capacity in that disaster response. So we had breakout sessions to define ways to how we were going to move forward, really increase more effective Canadian humanitarian assistance when international humanitarian disasters happen. So really, as a group, although that we were certainly a diverse group from different Canadian organizations, some operating strictly in Canada, but also even at the local, provincial, and national level, and some at the international and global level, we kind of saw that we could agree to devising or developing a framework, with the Humanitarian Coalition, that we could actually adapt to deal, with other disasters that could be strictly in Canada. So we really made the workshop of interest to all of the members of this council, and really, how we kind of shaped it forward. So from that, obviously, is what we're talking about today, is this whole agreement for the Conference Board of Canada and the Humanitarian Coalition to do this research project to really enhance Canada's contribution in the international, humanitarian crisis. So really, the primary focus of this enhancement will really be through strengthening our partnership between the humanitarian organizations and the private sector. So we're looking at 3 specific goals. We've got to identify the respective capacities or motivations and barriers and limitations of Canadian humanitarian and business actors for collaboration in the humanitarian process. We also want to look to identify specific opportunities for collaboration within Canadian business and humanitarian organizations which support or improve international disasters response capacity. And third, it's really to identify the resources and processes which could support effective cross-sector partnership, which improve international humanitarian response, and then develop and validate feasible models for effective Canadian cross-sector partnership. So really, when we look at all this, is that the research project will really focus on the response for Canadian organizations and how, businesses to humanitarian crisis can occur outside of Canada. But as I said, however, as applicable, we also can draw from some, good practices for collaborations which occurred, response organizations, businesses in Canada to natural disasters, man-made disasters, or some of the complex, emergencies which might have occurred in Canada as well. And the example that comes to mind is the 2013 Alberta flood, and how that community really got together and really engaged that. So as you explained, the timelines, we're looking at December with a May publication for the minor report. We want to really detail, the key objectives regarding the collaboration. The report really contains a set of about 10 key recommendations, and it's really to strengthen that collaboration that focuses on business and the humanitarian organizations, and perhaps some other recommendations that surface throughout the research. So the research project will be delivered by my colleague, Michael Bassett. He's a senior research associate at the conference board. Michael was with us today. And it's really, to taking part in that, and Michael will also be taking part in the panel that we have this afternoon, the role of the private sector humanitarian response. So it's really, I think you're in really good hands with Michael as a lead researcher with this project, and we really look forward to working with the coalition.
Thank you very much, Paul. We will take a few questions, and this is not meant to be a long session. There's going to be a further conversation about private sector engagement afterwards. So certainly welcome questions. I just want to clarify just a couple of things, that in addition to the research itself, we're actually specifically going to be reaching out to the community to actually have our own consultations in parallel. I think by the time we get to a research report, we want to collectively as a community have an idea of whether we want to move forward or not, what might actually serve our interests in doing so. One of the really fascinating things about this research is it's very much targeted at very practical implications for us here in Canada. Are there ways that we can specifically support the development of strategic partnerships for disaster response, ways that we can incubate those partnerships in effective ways? And here we're talking about partnerships beyond money. And that really requires out-of-the-box thinking. That requires different people in different organizations. People that just work on programs are not enough. People that just work on partnerships are not enough. We need to try to think about getting out of the box. And so in addition to Michael Bassett, who's going to be leading that research with the conference board, Marie-Ève Bertrand has joined our team specifically to do that consultation and that support, and I hope you'll reach out to her as well. I know that this may be an interesting project to many. You may have a number of questions. We're happy to take a few before closing and moving on to the afternoon sessions.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Clémentine. My understanding is that NGOs are part of the private sector. They're just non-for-profit, so I'm not quite sure I understand the semantic here. And my second point is, are humanitarian crises a business like any other business? And if we consider they're not, what kind of safeguard do you guarantee in order to protect some, what I would call values?
Mm-hmm. I have some very good questions too. Either of you want, or Rosemary, do you want to address that? Or?
I heard the second one, but not the first one.
Well, the first one was the question of whether we are the private sector as well, as nonprofits. I do think there's a distinction to make on that point, but...
It's exactly that question. Of course we are. But in terms of this mantra of private-public sector partnerships and tripartite partnerships, we're kind of classified differently. And so again, it's unpacking what do we mean by the private sector. So for example, you could put out the example of grand challenges. Well, is grand challenges private sector, or is it not-for-profit sector, et cetera, because it's being funded to actually invest in startups in emerging markets, et cetera, to provide that seed capital, bring the best minds together for new innovations in maternal health, for example, or child survival. So I think that's an absolutely fair question. Your second question was more to how do you decide, or how do we ensure, I guess, that the principles that we've been talking about for 2 days now are honored and adhered to in any private-public sector partnership, particularly in a humanitarian crisis. And I think that, I think everyone in the room would say that they have to be absolutely embedded in the MOU or the relationship that would go to business principles around child rights and protection, the transparency initiative, et cetera. And that's why I say when you go to put it through the filters, there's probably not a lot of private sector entities that are going to meet all of those conditions that we absolutely need before agreeing to partner with.
Yeah, I would also add that this is about exploration. We're not, what's going to be interesting is to see whether these relationships can get through the filters that we all have in terms of protecting our principles. The fact is that in any partnership, different partners need to find their interest. And so is there room for alignment here? And in fact, this project is about answering that question. There may not be. But I suspect there is, because there's real appetite for having some of that conversation. And it's not necessarily that the partnership is about your response on the ground. As we scale up for big disasters, we sometimes need legal assistance or financial assistance. And to what extent can you have transference of staff or employees between organizations if you have those standing partnerships? I think we have to be willing to look at the full range of how we might engage. And that's a challenge to us. And are we able to look at that? Any other questions from the room? Anyone want to contest? Ask a question? Ian.
When the minister spoke yesterday, he spoke about all kinds of new things that were required, new ways of thinking, new ways of doing business, but he mentioned the private sector about 5 times. And he mentioned the private sector, I think, mostly in the context of cash. He was saying that governments can't meet the challenge anymore, and I think he was talking about money. You say it's not only about money, but I wonder how much is it about money? And how much more money can we promise the minister will come from the private sector for these things?
Well, thank you for challenging, Ian, as always. Is it always about money? I mean, there's always money involved, is there not? But
well, no, I don't agree with you, actually, because I think that there's different things, like particularly in emergency response, where there's supply chains that might be very helpful for our response, distribution channels, there's gifts in kind, which perhaps you can equate to money. I think it's more about how do we actually get more investment, not just in terms of the partnerships and the humanitarian response, but more investment moving around the world to do appropriate job creation and help build sustainable economies, et cetera. So I think it's a spectrum of those things, but for the civil society here, I think it's where is there a value add that we don't have that would make a response more effective, maybe faster, et cetera, that is within the framework of the principles in which we have to work. And there may not be a lot, I guess that's my main point, there may not be a lot of those, but if they're there and it makes sense, then I believe we should be pragmatic about these things and look for where that value proposition, value exchange makes sense, and walk away when it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly we've seen the role of corporate Canada, obviously in the way of cash donations, and in many cases they've sort of taken on that role because they've got a social conscience and they want to give back and they want to play a role in helping the community be vibrant. If the community is vibrant, obviously that helps their business. So there's that self-serving interest as well. But I mean, that's happening. The maturing around coordinating in kind. Of course, you can think of the airline companies coordinating the supply and moving, the Unilever of coordinating some of their products and in kind. But I look at our recent activity with WestJet doing their annual journey to Haiti to go and help out, and this is a number of employees that have gotten together and want to try and do something. There's obviously a coordination being done, but I think there's more that could be done, and I believe there's a genuine interest on the part of corporate Canada that they want to get involved. I certainly saw that in October when we saw that from the group. So it's a matter of understanding what they would like to do, what they have to offer, and then it's a question for the organization to figure out, is this something that we're willing to to work out and collaborate with. And I mean, at the end of the day, if there's an alignment, then it'll work.
And we need to distinguish between what's CSR, putting employees on a plane to go to Haiti might be CSR into the spectrum, versus what's just a good proposition in terms of it's not about CSR, but it's about getting a job done that needs to get done in a highly effective way. And it may not have any. That's why the motivation question is an interesting one. Is motivation important, or I'm not sure how I'm going to answer that, but I want to think about it. But it's more, what is it I need to make this response more effective that I don't have, and do I source that partnership from a civil society, a local partner, a Canadian partner, etc., from a very pragmatic perspective? I think that's part of the unpacking that needs to get done. I just think we are all talking about different things, and I don't think we have a common view, common language to actually have those conversations yet.
I am going to wrap up, but just building up on that, I mean, really what we've been given here is an opportunity by the generous support of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development to explore these questions. And we don't know exactly where they're going to take us, but one of the things that I've really found in talking to members of the CIC at the conference board is that there is appetite for that conversation. Why shouldn't we go down that path and have that conversation? When big disasters like Haiti or the Philippines typhoon happen, even corporations that don't have this in their mandate don't think they should. Employees mobilize, the C-suite mobilizes, and if we don't talk to them before the disaster happens, they don't have the information they need to make the right decisions. And if we want to try to capitalize on that, we need to have those conversations. It's what we're entering into. And we'll see where it takes us. We look forward to you engaging with us in that process. And we'll, of course, be available to answer questions if anyone has any. So thank you both, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nick, Paul, and Rosemary. This is clearly a big conversation, hence why if you flip over the page in your agenda, you will notice at 2:15, when we reconvene after our break, here in the atrium, we will have the role of the private sector in humanitarian response, good practice, and opportunities for expanded collaboration. Sounds somewhat familiar. So if you are interested in hearing more of this discussion and a bit expanded, I would encourage you to participate in that session. The Resource Library will host a session on strengthening local response to disasters. How do we know what works? And finally, in the seminar room, the cost of security. So we have a 15-minute break, and at 2:15, please find your seats in the plenary. Thank you.